This is Megan, and I'm happy to monitor questions and bring them to us during our presentation today. And I am an outlier. I have the Parrot Conservation Alliance background, and I'm excited to share I'm the new member of the steering committee for the Parrot Conservation Alliance, and we're excited to tell you more about what we learned in Arizona in October.
Okay, Dara, sound check.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it was a really exceptional meeting, and I'm really excited to share a few things, a few highlights.
Okay, looks like we are now live on Facebook. Yay!
Yes, we are. And now, share. Now, hopefully, cool. We're getting there. Yes, excellent. All right. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Again, if you can keep an eye on the Q&A so that we're not ignoring people, that would be awesome. And I invite you both to stay unmuted unless you have noisy birds. The goal of this is to be a little more informal with the sharing. And feel free to just jump in with your comments whenever you've got something you want to add, because I know I'm going to forget things. There's too much to fit into an hour. We're going to just pick some highlights for you. Megan, Dara, and I had a lot of fun. Gosh, it was only, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, not that long ago, October 14th, 15th. We have a Goffins. Look at that. We went to Arizona, to Tempe, for the second gathering of the Parrot Conservation Alliance. And we had a 2-day conference planned with all the members. It was a total of about between 35 to 40 people. And then following the 2 days of discussions and workshopping, we had 2 field trips. So we're going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of some of that and show you some highlights. We've got 84 slides, but it's mainly photographs. Dara and I are going to share a few highlights from some of the presentations that we thought were really worth going through, but we're not trying to represent the whole topic because we've only got an hour and we want to show you lots of pictures from the Oasis. So we'll get there. So this conference was the second gathering of this alliance. The constituent members are mainly sanctuaries. We've only done 1 or 2 presentations about this alliance to date. It's relatively new in the world of rescues and sanctuaries. It formed in 2019. Patty Dewey Finch began forming this coalition. She had been a director at the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries for some time, so she was very well connected to a lot of sanctuaries, and the GFAS accreditation is a really high bar. So she began with a bunch of accredited parrot sanctuaries across the US and then reached out to them, giving them the opportunity to add in some rescues if at least 2 of them were willing to second their addition. And we were very honored and fortunate to be included as a charter member at the beginning after getting nominated by more than 2. So most of these groups are either sanctuaries or conservation on-site rescues. There's Belize and Arcus and Guatemala who are part of this alliance as well. So it's a really amazing network for us. We're learning a lot by having increased contact with these organizations. And it's also a great way for us to focus more on conservation. This whole group is under the umbrella of the American Bird Conservancy, and they're providing some sort of continuity and support to make sure that the alliance continues. And that brings in the focus on conservation, because if you truly love these birds as much as you do supporting rescue and sanctuary, then surely we should be looking to how to help them survive in their natural environment. So this is a really fantastic group. And I'm talking too much about each slide, so I'll go faster. Here's a quick team photo of everybody. This was bright and early on the first day, whilst we were still high off of our morning coffee, and you can see Megan and Dara in there somewhere as well. This will be available for perusal in the recordings. I'm not going to read out a bunch of presentation headings, but there were some key themes in the topics that were discussed at the conference. A lot of focus on conservation on the first day, from the perspective of several of the organizations who are boots on the ground, literally guarding nests, and talking about the success of some specific projects that have had their support. And then moving on to releasing, which I'm going to talk a little bit about because I found that really fascinating. And then moving on, looking at a little bit more welfare oriented, the new Animal Welfare Act provisions for birds, and also the concept of home sanctuary, which Dara is going to talk a little bit about. Fantastic presentation by Foster Parrots. Sunday, there was a little bit more about managing rescue response. So in the context of confiscation networks, what happens when border customs find exotic animals? Where do they go? They can't all go to zoos, as you know, some people might just assume. So what happens to those animals, and what networks are in place to provide appropriate care and potentially even repatriation, which would be ideal, wouldn't it? And some of the recent activity that's been happening there in the last couple of years. And then moving on to kind of more best practice for large scale operations. How do we handle preparedness, disaster planning, and also succession planning and fundraising, things that any responsible larger organization should be turning their eye towards. You know, Micaboo's 26 years old. That's about the same age as the Oasis. And as Janet shared, third generation succession is very, very rare. So we have to think about that carefully if we want to still be around in 10 years. So this was all a lot of presentation and workshopping, a lot of sitting in hotel conference rooms. But after that, we ventured off to Ginger's, and Megan and I have got some pictures to share from Ginger's Parrot Rescue. She's in Casa Grande, not too far from where we were meeting at the conference. And we've got some quick show and tell shares from that. And then we went on to the Oasis on Monday, which was a full-on field trip. And unfortunately, Dara had to get back to her real life, so she was not able to join us, but we've got some pictures to share from the Oasis as well. So I touched on some of the key themes from the content at the event, and I want to start by sharing just a handful of insights and snippets from a presentation that Thomas White Jr. gave on Reintroductions. It's got a very formal academic title about minimizing potential LE effects, but it's really about successfully reintroducing birds that were captive bred into their natural habitat. And Thomas, amazingly, has a career of almost 30 years of doing this professionally in multiple locations, helping return parrots into the wild and repopulate areas where the population has been dwindling. And he's got some, frankly, fantastic learnings and takeaways and stories from his experiences of doing this. So he talked about a couple of scenarios. He's currently in Puerto Rico, where he's been working on U.S. Fish and Wildlife's project to save the Puerto Rican parrot, otherwise known as Amazona vittata. Back in the late 60s, we were down to just 13 known specimens in the wild in Puerto Rico. But this is basically the last surviving parrot in U.S. territory in its native habitat. So the government has been running a project to help boost the numbers and help this species survive. At one time, there had been, it's thought that there was as many as 100,000 of these birds on the island. And so with the work of conservation starting in the 70s and onwards, we got up to about 200 birds, which is good progress across 3 locations on the island. And then 2017 happened. And there was a double whammy of Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria. And Hurricane Maria was a direct hit on the El Yunque oldest population of the parrots. And it wiped out all of them that were released except for 2, which is a pretty sobering story to tell. Thomas was, together with his wife, he was part of the team of 2 just the two of them, who stayed in the storm bunker underneath the center with all of the birds that they still had in captivity. And he was there without communications for about 2 weeks after the storm. It was a Category 5 storm. It was the 10th largest storm to come in off the Atlantic in history. And it was a direct hit on their facility. They saved all the birds, although they lost 6 after the storm, which is an interesting story in provisions and supplies. And of the 2 that survived in the wild, out of about 50 that were in that territory, it was a male-female pair, and the female died shortly after, presumably to predation. So they recaptured the male, and he was part of the first release group when they were finally able to start re-releasing the birds after the forest began to recover, and was the first bird to begin populating nests, and they had 3 fledglings the first year after release. So his work there is pretty amazing. He talked about 4 different release strategies, from hard release to precision release to soft release, with 2 different approaches depending on starting at the beginning end of the breeding season. And it was all really fascinating. There were lots of nuances along, releasing 1/2 of a breeding pair from captivity, so that that bird would learn how to forage and get familiar with the area, and then in the next release batch release its mate. And that kept the released bird close to the release site, because they came back to visit their mate, and then when the mate was released, they would have the support of that bird, and learn the foraging behaviors and survival instincts from their mate. Lots and lots of fascinating techniques and insights that he shared, but I have to keep going. So he also talked about the Spix macaw. He was a consultant, is a consultant on the work that's happening in Brazil to reintroduce the Spix macaw. And he talked a lot about the strategies that they've been using there. They've released 20, and he said it's the best organized release work, conservation work he has seen, with a 60% survival rate in the first year, which is very high for reintroducing a species that has literally no wild population to have a cohesive wild flock with. They used blue-winged macaws as mentor species, and built a dedicated facility where the birds could acclimate, and then over a period of 4 months meet the blue-winged macaws before release. And the blue-winged macaws, some were previously wild, so they provided good examples for surviving and navigating the local area. They used supplemental feeding to keep them close to the release habitat, and had some really fantastic results. So that program, again, with Thomas being a consultant on it, that's a really fantastic example of a great success story, which is still ongoing. So that's a picture of the site that they've been using, where they have the birds and do the soft releasing from there. So I'd love to talk more about that, but we've got to keep rolling. We've literally just got a couple of slides to acknowledge that Brooke Durham was there from SoCal Parrot. That was the first chance we'd had to meet her. And obviously, we feel a lot of affinity with SoCal Parrot, because once in a while we get to rehabilitate and release NorCal parrots. So we do our little bit for them. And Brooke had some great stories from boots on the ground work she's doing. They only rescue and rehab the wild parrot population. They don't do any captive parrot, pet parrot rescue work. It's all about helping the wild populations, of which there are about 16 or 17 different species living in Southern California. She had some great insights to share about the differences between Amazons and conures. We obviously only have conures wild in San Francisco and the Bay Area, but down in Southern California, they also have Amazons. And it's funny because you'd think that conures would be easier to handle because of what we know about caring for them in our homes. Amazons are considered gnarlier sometimes, a little bit more difficult or advanced level. But it's the other way around in nature. Amazons are pretty easygoing about adding new members to the flock, but the conures are gangsters, according to Brooke. And you have to be really careful about how you reintroduce them to an existing flock to ensure cohesion. which was very insightful and kind of aligns with my own personal experience. So that was nice to have that ratified.
This
So
is Megan. I think Brooke also shared a really important thing, which is yellow is nature's caution tape. We loved that. Any bird with yellow, that is nature saying, beware, they will hurt you, or they can hurt you.
She had a video of a baby Amazon being very unhappy at being handled, and his little yellow stripe was considered the little nature caution tape. You approach with care. That's a good rule in life. Anything with red or yellow on it, approach with caution. Yeah, there was a lot of great takeaways for us. I mean, we don't do a lot of rehab and release. We get to do a little bit. And this was insightful for us, thinking about the times of year that happens, how to ensure flock cohesion, reintroducing successfully. Anecdotally, what we're doing is working. It's not going to have a major effect on what we're doing, but it is very helpful to understand best practice and learn a lot about how their operations have been running for comparison. And that brings us on to the topic of home sanctuary, which was a fantastic foster parrots presentation by Kelly and Amanda. And Dara, I think you're going to walk us through some of the concepts here. I'll just let me know when you want to advance the slides.
Yeah, so next, perfect there. So yeah, there was a great presentation by Foster Parrots. They are a registered nonprofit, and they have a physical location, which is sort of distinct from Mickaboo, as everyone knows. And they have, so they're located in New England. They have 23 acres facility or area. But they also, have recognized that, essentially their motto is no cage is big enough. And really, when we're thinking about having these parrots in our homes, they're historically pets, as we have sort of considered them up until recently, but really by labeling them as such, we've really kind of taken away their autonomy and their sort of freedom to just live as they are. And so one of their, I really liked their sort of the 5 rules that they live by or operate under, and that is the freedom from hunger or thirst. And these are things that we obviously are thinking about when we're thinking about standards of care. Freedom from discomfort, pain, injury, or disease. Freedom to express normal behaviors. And I think that that's sort of a big one that I'd like to talk a little bit more about. And also freedom from fear and distress. And so these are some things to kind of think about when we're talking about the sort of range of birds that we take in at Mickaboo. Next slide, please. And so where is this concept of home sanctuary coming from? And this is where we're sort of reframing adoption. And so one of the, of course, reasons that I think we are all very aware of is that there's just so many more parrots coming in, and the rescues, even those that have facilities, they're overwhelmed and overflowing. We don't have necessarily enough adoptive homes. And then there's also this idea that well, maybe even if we had enough room in sanctuaries, these large outdoor open aviaries are not for every bird. And a lot of birds that maybe have been sort of living in a home with a family, to suddenly put them out in an aviary is not something that you're really should be supporting, because they may not do very well. Although certainly we can never sort of underestimate their ability to thrive in varying situations. Now, this is also a way of thinking when we think about adopting a pet. There's certain sort of expectations with that. And so by changing the language is very important, the way we think about things. And when we start thinking about it as a sanctuary, well, that is actually thinking about, okay, well, how do we take care of birds that may struggle in a traditional adoption program where people want a pet, perhaps, or they have certain expectations or ways that they hope that new family member will fit into their home, versus thinking about it in terms of a sanctuary is a different approach. and it's really sort of to talk about the unconditional lifetime care. So if there is a behavior that comes up that you weren't hoping for, but is sort of a natural behavior of the parrot, well, we don't necessarily want to change that, but we want to kind of unconditionally provide those structures and those basic needs that they are still so deserving of. So next slide, please. And so I like this term microsanctuary. So essentially where we don't have these large facilities, and this is really how, you know, Micabu operates. We have a large number of foster homes, and we can think about many of them as these microsanctuaries where, you know, a lot of times there are, you know, thinking about, okay, well, this is the way a parrot is, and we can certainly think about behavioral modification and sort of, but rephrase, well, what is the end goal of those behavioral modifications? Is it to please us, or is it to actually increase the quality of life of these birds? So it can be sort of very important. So when we talk about target training, well, these are things that may very well improve the bird's quality of life because you can get them safely from one place to another. But if that bird is kind of not really wanting human behaviors, then, you know, that's something that can still allow these sort of safety parameters, but letting them sort of be themselves and not sort of forcing that, okay, well, you have to let me scratch your head or else you're, you know, not sort of fitting in with my expectations. And so it's really valuing them for their inherent value. And I think this also in turn sort of becomes a little bit more sort of accepting in how they are. And then, you know, months or years later, they can still surprise you in some of their adaptive abilities of how they may sort of learn new things and to settle into their environment. It also really emphasizes that these are not a pet. These are wild animals. We have not domesticated them per se the way that we have with dogs and cats. These are really either directly out of the wild or one of the first or second generations. And so these are indeed, it's along the lines of potentially keeping a tiger in your house, right? So they are in fact wild animals, and a lot of them are in need because of what humans have done to them. And then there's, you know, again, this sort of pathway to, okay, if we think about it as a sanctuary, we kind of set the expectations that there is going to be some healing involved, and that we're sort of to support them in the healing of their both social, emotional, and physical health. Next slide, please. And so, but there's of course a lot of challenges, and I think many people recognize this. And of course, one thing that we also, you know, can share with foster parrots is that locating qualified homes there may be a lot of qualified homes out there, but it also takes a lot of effort to identify them and form these connections. And then also the person power to support individuals and the educational opportunities to really help people. You know, nobody is really perfect, and we can also learn from each other on how to be guardians of these birds. Then there's also the constructions of one of so foster parrots will go in and help with constructions and plannings and aviaries, and, you know, Micabu, we source cages and particular habitats, and you know, that takes time, labor, and funding. And so these are always sort of big shared experiences. And here's some of the photos that they have from some of their home sanctuaries, particularly one in the middle there where they've sort of adapted a part of their, you know, human living space to kind of set it up more like a friendly aviary or something that we would expect to see in terms of the level of a sanctuary, but built inside somebody's house. Next slide, please. So then I guess I will, I don't know if we want to stop for any kind of questions, but there were essentially, I think, a lot of takeaways in how we sort of think about, you know, birds are wild animals first, and then we have them in our homes. And so I did want to kind of talk a little bit about, you know, just a few highlights of these conservations efforts and strategies that were a few examples. So we did see some examples of the Puerto Rican parrot. And if we go to the next slide. So here's everybody in the room, and that looks like that's Daniel Leben there. So he works at the American Bird Conservatory. And if we go to the next slide, and so one of the things that they talked out, and this was, I think this was sort of an exceptional way of thinking about it. So their emphasis is really on conserving the habitat, and also particularly nesting areas. So they have actually bought out a fair amount of land and promoted a lot of programs. And if you provide habitat, a lot of these parrots have gone are endangered or extinct simply because of loss of habitat. And bringing them back into the wild requires that there is actually some wild spaces for them. And so that has been a big effort. And one in particular here is some pictures of the gray-breasted parakeet in Brazil. And, another common theme was not just providing the habitat, but also providing nesting areas and nest boxes, which can kind of help these birds to reproduce. And you can see some youngsters in a nest box on the far left there. And then you can see them all sort of sitting out there and flocking together. So next slide. Next slide. Okay. And then we also had Laura Kim Joyner give us an excellent talk and talking about some of the efforts by One Earth Conservation. And so this is, they've got several programs in different parts of Central America, but one of the take-home messages is that the illegal pet trade is still ongoing globally, and it really has ongoing harm to parrots. And that one of these things is it's actually been moving along to actually moving eggs instead of wild offspring or hatchlings for ease of movement. But of course, as you can imagine, obtaining these eggs is quite, there's often high mortalities, as well as in both humans and parrots. So in terms of, we talked about, people being out there guarding the nests, and gave a very sort of, one of these individuals was attacked and killed out on the field guarding a nest. And also in terms of the humans themselves trying to poach, so falling out of trees while trying to poach eggs. So there's both parrot and human loss on both sides. And then even after, the initial sort of illegal capture in the wild, there's a remarkably high mortality of wild caught birds, even among those that sort of survive. So she gave a statistics of 10% surviving the first year, but I'm sure there's a fair amount of variability to that. And then the next slide, please. And then, what sort of gives some additional insight into how potentially sanctuaries and even, so SoCal Parrot is involved in a variety of other areas where we think about, okay, well, but if we do confiscate parrots and of course other animals at the border, well, what happens to them? And so while we'd like to think, it would be lovely to be able to repatriate them, get them back to where they were, well, that's not necessarily as easy as it sounds, because you have to think about, okay, well, what are the government regulations? Are we now introducing pathogens into a wild population? And if we can even sort of identify where that wild population might be, because a lot of times, by the time they've reached certain borders, we have absolutely no idea where they're coming from. But there's also, the locations of quarantine facilities can be quite far away from where parrots are being identified as being smuggling into the country in the United States. And then there's all of these sort of coordination. If they're young birds, well, while they are certainly doing the best that they can, well, if we have U.S. Customs and Border Protection, they're not necessarily able to, take in some hand-raised babies or to house these eggs. And so that can also be a really difficult thing to do. And so there's a new position created. So this is Mandy, who gave an excellent talk, and she's a new wildlife confiscation coordinator from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And it's even I think as we were there, she's like, oh yeah, and just yesterday I got texted because someone showed up at the border with 7 spider monkeys in their backpack, and we have to figure out what to do with them. And so it's, there's animals every day. And so, some of these are birds. And so there were, on the statistics, 422 live birds. And if we think about, how many birds we're kind of taking in, and as Mickaboo, we can imagine that this is a lot of movement and care and housing and access to veterinarian care. So this new position is hopefully, she's working very hard on connecting sanctuaries to these confiscated birds, and sort of, they are treated as evidence, and so often they need to be held in facilities until court dates. But there's also, what happens to them? They are living, breathing creatures that also deserve, a chance to survive and thrive. And so hopefully this is sort of going to be continued efforts on how to create a process for these victims of illegal trade. All right. So I think that we're on to Megan.
Thank you. I get to talk about the fun tours we went on, and this is also some of the time we got to really spend socializing and meeting other people that are doing similar things to Mickaboo across the country and across the world. So the first tour all three of us got to go to was to Ginger's Parrot Rescue. If you don't already follow them on social media, please go ahead and do so. We like to support them, and they help us too. And they're in Casa Grande, Arizona. We took a bus tour out there, and they have a brand new facility they built. Ginger was able to make a new space, and she devoted about half of that facility to parrots, and the other half is her home. And if that is not my future dream for life, I'm not sure what is. That gave me goals to aim for. And they have an indoor atrium facility, an enclosed fight patio, and Ginger's Parrot Rescue is caring for about 85 birds. They have a focus on Senegal parrots and then a focus on birds who maybe have some behavioral things going on that make them harder to be placed in standard homes. And they do a mix of sanctuary and adoption. So they do have some birds that live at Ginger's and will stay there for the remainder of their lives, but they also do, similar to Mickaboo, have an adoption process that folks can go through to adopt some of their birds. They've been around since 2007, and they are entirely volunteer run, and we got to meet some of their amazing volunteers. And I will walk you through some of the photos from Ginger's. So first, oh, sorry.
They don't normally have a tiki bar. We should probably say that. Ginger's
yes.
Not normally mixing mocktails at the start of her day.
I know, they're really just showing up Mickaboo, that fancy building and the tiki bar. No, they don't usually have a tiki bar. She brought in a special mocktail mixer for our event, which was really sweet. And so we got to have a little tiki space and get to know each other. And here you can see a sign says all parrots are welcome, humans by appointment only. I don't know about you guys, but I certainly feel that way. And there's me at the tiki bar. And while we were chatting with our fellow rescuers, we got to realize how respected Mickaboo is. And I wanted to bring that home for you guys. Mickaboo is well known across the country for the rescue work we do and for the scale that we work on. And so I want you guys all to feel proud to be a part of this organization. Here's one of the fun little birds we met who was sleeping in her food bowl. That is a bird who is asleep. She likes to hang out with her head there. And we'll look at the next slide. And here's a sweet little cockatiel. Martha, I know you're on this call, and I know this bird is going to sing to your heart. This little, mostly bald and plucked cockatiel vulture.
Yeah, he stole our hearts. She does have a flight of budgies and cockatiels in a sort of indoor covered patio. We did not get to see them, but we did get to see her special needs older budgies and cockatiels room. So most of the birds are Senegal and smaller. Larger birds like Amazons and upwards, she tends to redirect to other rescues or rehome through other channels.
Yeah, thank you. And here's a bird, if you follow Ginger, you might be aware of Weatherby. Weatherby is a hawkhead parrot, and they don't have the best reputation, and Ginger is working to change our understanding of hawkheads and how we can work with them. Weatherby is a beautiful bird, and it was really cool to get to see someone who you've seen online for so long.
Yeah, he really lit up when she walked in the room. It was funny. I talked to him a couple of times before she walked in, and then he just became a different bird the moment that he could see her. She's got 3 hawk heads in her cenical rim. So that's kind of a mini specialization she's doing on this side.
And here's the group of us who went in front of the tiki bar. It was a good time to get to meet everybody, so we're happy for that. And then the next day, Dara had to fly home, and Sarah and I joined a few others for a long bus ride to the Oasis. The Oasis is about 90 minutes east of Tucson, and it is a long dirt road to get there. So we enjoyed that bumpy road, and our bus driver had no idea where we were going. And when we showed up to the Oasis, he was a bit stunned, but enjoyed coming along with us for the journey.
3 hours each way. Just
yeah.
Context.
Yes. 6 hours. 6 hours in a bus to go see birds. And as we were leaving, we asked him to stop so we could look at some wild birds. So this man really understands our love of birds. But it was quite a drive, but I'm glad we went. And a lot of you might be aware of the Oasis. It is one of the, I don't know if I can say the largest, but it's one of the most respected and largest parrot sanctuaries in the country.
Yeah, I think it is the largest. Yeah. They have about just over 800 birds.
Yeah. And for perspective, y'all, 800 birds, that is Mickaboo's a half an oasis almost. We have over 450 birds in our care. So that is a really large number that we're looking at. And I hope you feel proud to be contributing to the birds we care for. So here's a group walking up. The Oasis is on, because they have 800 birds, most of them parrots, you can imagine it makes a lot of sound. So they don't have any close neighbors. They are all out by themselves. And so they are spread out on this big property, and we got to take a tour of the property. And here's their main house. That's what that photo was. This is a map of their facility. And as we go through the photos, I'll describe what we're looking at. And so here's the first building we went to was a new build, and they are doing a lot of new construction, which is exciting. We're happy for them. And this building actually had separate aviaries for different species of birds. There was one for cockatoos, one for grays. I'm not sure what other, there's a couple other species. There's like 4 or 5 of these large aviaries that we could walk into. And the one thing that was unique about this building was all of the birds in this building had been exposed to Pacheco's. And Pacheco's is actually a way that the herpes virus presents in birds. And similar to humans, if you have been exposed to it and contracted it, you are a lifelong carrier of that virus. So this beautiful space, they can only keep these particular birds in. They can't introduce more birds unless they are known carriers of Pacheco's, so that they're not spreading disease. And that was a really interesting thing that we learned throughout when you're working with this large scale of birds to mitigate the spread of disease. And you guys know at Mickaboo, we are always talking about our quarantine policy because parrots as prey animals hide illness. And you can see as much as you try it, it's still something that it's hard to tackle and completely mitigate. So they did have a few outbreaks of illness that they talked about, and we got to learn what that looked like. In this particular instance, it seemed to really impact the Amazon parrots. They were the most impacted by Pacheco's. And then the rest of the birds, while they tested positive, most of them were able to survive that illness, and they're now just carriers. So that's what this.
Some are exposed, but not, you don't know for sure. They were exposed, they may or may not be carriers. And so,
right.
It's not like all these birds are dying of Pacheco's, but to reduce risk, they have to house them separately now.
Correct. Yeah, thank you. And all of these birds were well cared for, and they had beautiful environments. And we'll go through and look at more photos of this facility. You can see some of our friends here from the sanctuary in Tennessee with cockatoos. And if you're looking, you can see the facility has these big walk-in aviaries, and then each aviary has a sliding door that kind of goes out to a covered patio. So all of the birds can go out and get access to sunshine and fresh air when they'd like to, and come back inside to hang out. Here I am with one of their ambassador cockatoos who just wanted to be loved. She was really sweet.
I will say that you could retitle this presentation Megan holding lots of birds, because almost every aviary we walked into, Megan would just walk up and scoop up a bird immediately. I don't know how she is able to do that. I largely did not, but Half of these pictures are Megan holding birds, as you will see.
And this was Lady Grey. She was an African grey there who you can see was well plucked, but also really well loved and excited to get attention.
I think it makes a good highlight as well that, you know, we talk about sending birds to a sanctuary where they'll be happiest, but not all birds are happiest in sanctuary. They have become so socialized with humans that they're craving the attention of humans, and the company of other birds isn't enough. And you could definitely tell in some of these enclosures when you walked in, some of the birds just lit up and came straight over, like they missed human contact, and they were very grateful to get attention from visitors.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a question about the possibility of spreading contamination from birds as we, the humans, were going through the sanctuary. And they have a lot of things to mitigate that. So they have kind of foot washes at the entrance to all of their big buildings that you can sanitize your feet as you walk through. And then we are regularly sanitizing and washing our hands to really mitigate spreading any diseases between the birds. So thank you for asking that. And here's that shot of the outside part of the facility. So this is just a long fenced-in area that the birds can come out here when they want to and go back into the facility when they would like to get away from the heat. Being in Arizona, there are many days where it gets over 100, so they certainly come in when it gets hot like that. Here's just a sign to kind of show also to be mindful of the birds and respect them and that they can bite.
Yes. I did not go into the cockatoo aviary because I like myself whole. You know, visiting inside the aviaries was optional, and they were quite careful. For example, nobody was allowed inside the male cockatoo aviary, and that's for health and safety reasons because male cockatoos.
Yeah. And here's part of the new building that they're doing. So currently the Oasis they have paid staff. I think there's about 8 people on site that are managing the building or managing the care for these 850 birds. Most of them live on the property. They do have some volunteers who come in to help occasionally. But what they're building is going to be their new kitchen and prep area. And they're using a much older space right now. And that team of 8 people is hand washing the items to feed 850 birds. So once this facility is completed, it's going to really change their ability to care for these birds. They're going to be able to drive up with golf carts and pick up trays of foods. They're going to move to a tray feeding method rather than individual bowls.
This is deliberately sized. There's 2. That's right, Megan. I'm glad you mentioned that. This is basically the people in this picture are walking through what is a golf cart drive-through zone at the end of the service room, which is pretty cool. Yeah, the staff were understandably super excited about this because it's going to be life-changing for them.
Yeah, I bemoan cleaning for 2 birds. Can you imagine caring for 850 birds? What that looks like? It's really going to change it for them. We're excited for this to be ready.
And it should be next year, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And here's a shot of one of their aviaries. So they have a variety of outdoor aviaries that are mostly broken up by species. We met some interesting cohabitants in a few of them that we'll talk about as we get there. And because they are outside, they do have really great misting set up in all of their aviaries. So all of the birds can get out of the heat and there's always access to shade. But most of their birds are living in these large aviary setups by species, really.
This is the Macaw flight aviary. I think it's the longest contiguous open space. And it's either 80 or 100 feet long. I think it's 80 feet long, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and here's a shot inside of that macaw aviary. So you can see they have ladders hanging from the ceiling. There's birds hanging up there, up on the rafters. And then they have tons of wood that they've just suspended throughout the facility. And one of the unexpected visitors was actually in here, which makes us think that we can continue to work with diplomacy in a more impactful way. They have pigeons and doves that are living in this macaw aviary. They just keep to themselves and they don't bother one another. Here's a volunteer from East with a beautiful macaw. And the macaws, it was amazing to see them have space to fly and be free. And like Sarah mentioned, there were some who were really interested in human attention, some who just wanted attention from each other, but they all had whatever opportunities they needed was available here. And here's a group of us who were at the Oasis in the macaw aviary.
And don't forget to look at the top.
Yes, we were in a bomb zone. If a bird decided to drop some bombs on us, that could have happened there.
Both up there. One was hanging upside down, and one was hanging right way up. And they literally just hung there like bats for the whole time that we were walking around and taking pictures. It was really it was, you know, they're using full range of the space.
Yeah, and she had all species of macaw from blue and golds. I think there was maybe one hyacinth there. So she had a variety of macaws. And here is the African gray sanctuary. This is Tanya. She's also on Ginger's board, so she is very involved in parrot rescue in Arizona. And you can see their gray aviary. They have this center space with kind of a play gym on it. And then lots of space around. And the grays, as you can imagine, it just sounded kind of like walking into a sci-fi movie with all of the little bings and bizzes from the grays. And the ones who wanted treats were very quick to get on the ground and come chase after you and get their treats.
The PVC in the middle there is a misting tent. So that's plumbed. You can just see the center pipe on the floor. That's how the plumbing for the misting gets into the middle there. And off on the left, you can just see an entire toy destroyed on the floor. Some gray had been very industrious that day and destroyed something completely.
Yes, and since we were there in October, there were pumpkins in every aviary, and that was really fun to see the birds destroying the pumpkins. Here's a bird on the ground with an almond, I think.
I think it might be a bit of pumpkin because he was waddling away from the pumpkin table with his spoils. I think he might have been the guy responsible for the toy destruction earlier.
And then speaking of cross species, there was actually a couple of lilac crown Amazons living in that aviary who were unable to be introduced to other Amazons. I don't remember the reason, but they were living happily in that aviary. They were doing well.
Right, they were in the gray aviary. I'd forgotten about that. Well remembered.
Yeah. I'm going to remember Amazons. That's what I'll do. And then this is an aviary that would be illegal here in California. This is their Quaker Flight aviary. And it was amazing. This aviary was kind of built with like 4 different sections. And in the middle was a space that the birds could fly through to get to the other parts of the aviary. So, and the humans could walk beneath it. Yeah, like a tunnel system up above that the birds could fly through. And so we got to see lots of cool Quaker parrots. And for those that may be wondering why they're illegal in California, it is because of the way the Quaker parrot nests. Most parrots nest in cavities, and Quaker parrots build stick nests. And the place that they often do that is on power lines, which, as you can imagine, is dangerous. So that's why they're not allowed in California. And if we ever get a Quaker, we work to move them to places like the Oasis, where they can safely be kept. So
staff can bring them willow and let them do a little bit of stick building for fun, but then they clear it out regularly. So they get the chance to exhibit their natural behaviors, but not get anywhere with it.
Right. Yeah, it was really nice to see them there. And this is a former Mickaboo bird. This is Travis. He is a lorikeet who belonged to Louisa. And after her passing, he moved to the Oasis into their lorikeet aviary, and we got to go meet him. He jumped on my shoulder. I think he was trying to drink the nectar from one of the flowers on my dresses. Poor Travis, there was no nectar for him in the flower, but it was really nice to get to meet a former Mickaboo bird, and he was super happy to be with his other Lori friends.
Yeah, Louisa was a big time supporter of the Oasis to the extent that she was very involved with them. And so it made sense for Travis to go here. This is where he'll be happiest. And he's a really fascinating hybrid lorikeet as well. He's I forget what he's a hybrid between, but he's got a very unusual look. Very handsome.
Yeah, he's very handsome. And so here's kind of their I don't remember what this facility is called. We called it like their pick and pull space.
Pole barn.
Pole barn. Okay. So here you'll see there's lots, and these cages on the right are kind of the original cages the Oasis started with, and they have a new grant that they are working to update and upgrade these cages. But most of the birds in this space, there's mostly it's mostly Amazons, grays, macaws, and cockatoos in this building. And the majority of the birds are there's some aviaries, but they're mostly in smaller individual cages that are pairs or singles. And the reason most of these birds are in this space and not integrated into the main aviary is they are just birds who don't play nicely with other birds for whatever reason. They were not able to be introduced. Maybe they got aggressive and tried to attack other birds. Maybe they got picked on by other birds. There's a variety of reasons, but most of these birds need to be in a more individual setup, and that's what this space was. Lots of Amazons. I had a great time talking to all of them. This is a macaw.
Yeah, he's an interesting hybrid.
Yeah, beautiful green head. And here is their cockatiel and budgie aviary. They keep their cockatiels and budgies together. You can see they have tons of tree branches and then ropes hanging throughout the space. I know we say at Mickaboo that budgies are cockatiel birth control, and it seems to be the case here as well. But they all seemed really happy together, and you can see people have their hands out. Some of the birds were happy to fly and land on you, and some of them just wanted to hang out with other birds. And that's the great thing about the Oasis, is that they all can have what they need. Whatever's best for that bird is what they're provided with.
I think this was probably the highest population density aviary, and also the aviary with the most perches, but it was pretty cool to see them all flying around.
Yeah. And Sarah and I inside the aviary. An anatomy of a goose.
So they have a handful of geese and chickens, obviously with HPAI active. They haven't been accepting any waterfowl or other poultry, but they have a small number on the property, as well as some guardian, very big dogs who roam the property at night to keep everybody safe, because obviously they're in the middle of the desert and they get scorpions and snakes and all kinds of other wildlife that come by. And some of these aviaries are not walled off in any way, but the dogs provide an extra level of security.
Mm-hmm. And here is I think this is the male cockatoo aviary. So this is the one that none of us went into. There's only a few members at the Oasis that actually can go into here. There's a few birds in this aviary that will fly at you and bite your face if they do not know you. So we did not venture in. We wanted to leave with our noses. And they do also have, obviously with 850 birds, they have quite a few who have medical needs. So they have a few trailers that they use as kind of their medical center. So these birds and these carriers are all in the medical facility for various reasons, being monitored, getting medications. They're not going to live their whole lives here. It's just where they are while they're getting treatment. I think they said that they have over 100 of their birds are on medications, which, can you imagine medicating over 100 birds their specific medications every day? It's amazing, and we are so impressed at our friends at the Oasis for what they do. And in this photo is Janet. She is the executive director of the Oasis and is looking to retire eventually in her life, and we will support her through that succession. She's the second leader of the Oasis, and as she shared, rescues and sanctuaries rarely make it to a third leader, so we are here to help them do that. And then this is a kind of interesting fundraising thing that they have. It's their Rainbow Bridge garden, and folks that have lost a pet can buy a plaque to keep in this garden and remember their bird, and also support the Oasis. And in their main house, where the guest house, they had this picture, and you guys might recognize this. This is Mingus, and Mingus is one of the stars of the Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill film. And we were so excited to see a picture of him in the home.
Yeah, he moved to the Oasis and lived there for a few years with a couple of other wild parrots that had been in Mark's care when he moved out of Telegraph Hill.
And just some photos of inside. And again, this is the main building. And I think we have some photos. Yes, so this is the main facility where staff are. And you may be wondering, can I go work at the Oasis? Yes, you can. They are hiring, but they also always need volunteers. So if you are wanting to maybe get away for a long weekend or a few days and get away from the cell service, I can tell you there's absolutely no cell service there. You would be able to volunteer to go help the Oasis. They are always taking volunteers. They have a beautiful guest room that they will put you up in as long as you promise to help them care for their birds. So if you're interested in doing that, let us know. Sarah and Dara and I are all connected to the Oasis now, and we'd be happy to connect you so that you can have that opportunity to visit and help them care for their flock.
Yeah, they have 2 guest rooms. This is a picture of one of them. They're beautiful rooms, and they have Wi-Fi in their guest building. So you have your own bathroom and guest room, and then there's a communal living room, and then the office at the other end of the building that Janet usually does her admin work from. but all the staff have their own residential units that are separate from this. So you have the 2 guest rooms here, and then it's the staff kitchen and the communal space, and the office on the end. So it's a nice space. We had lunch here during our day visit, and they had just had someone stay here for a month helping. So you can literally go for a weekend, or you can stay for a month, as long as you're willing to roll up your sleeves and pitch in, and you know a thing or two about birds. That's definitely helpful, and they're grateful to have the help.
Yeah, and I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, but the Oasis is only a sanctuary. They do not adopt out birds like we do. They are providing a lifetime commitment to care for any bird that comes into the Oasis.
Yeah, they are. And to that point, they are also pretty full. We talk to a lot of people who reach out about, their plans for their birds, and they just kind of say, oh, well, my bird's going to go to a sanctuary. And I make a point of asking, have you talked to them? Because, not just the Oasis, but most of the sanctuaries now are either approaching or at capacity, and they're very careful about what they will agree to. So unless you have paid and have paperwork confirming your plans, I would not just assume your bird can go to a sanctuary.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful space. I highly recommend going there if you can, to visit or to help. They do tours if you do just want to visit. And at night you can see stars, which we're not used to in the Bay. You can see stars at night. Isn't that a shock?
It's so remote. There's a tiny little town called Cascabel just up the dirt road, another 10 minutes or so north of them, and it's barely a dot on the map. You're driving up dirt road for so far that you truly feel like it's almost the middle of nowhere I ever have felt I've been. And it's bizarrely peaceful, considering that you're surrounded by 800 screaming parrots. You only have to walk 20 steps away from their enclosures before the noise is really paled into the background. And it's a former pecan orchard, so they don't farm it for that anymore, and most of the trees aren't producing, but it's a beautiful space, and they're super nice. Everyone there is lovely. Like, you will have a great time if you just want to go into an alternate universe for a few days. Go here and give them a hand. And this picture, I think, oh no, it's the second last one. I was getting desperate towards the end. So rescue doesn't stop just because you're at a conference. We had a wild parrot from San Francisco come in whilst we were away. And so whilst sitting on one of the presentations, I was literally texting people to see if we could get him picked up and taken to the vet. And I've forgotten his name. I have to look it up. But yes, this is one of the baby parrots. We've had a record bumper year of baby parrots, unfortunately. I think we've taken in 8 now. Yeah, the rescue doesn't stop just because you're not in town. And fortunately, we were able to get this little guy picked up and taken to the vet. And that's the end. We're happy to take questions, but we also want to thank everybody who was presenting at the conference and provided a lot of the information that we were flying through in this hour. And a special thanks to Ginger and Janet for facilitating us being able to go and hang out and check out their spaces. Pretty amazing stuff. And I think
it was an amazing visit for sure.